So yeah, I didn't have it set up properly before to do the test. But yeah, this is what I was talking about. Where the fins behind the woofer are actually capable of performing differently than the actual diaphragm would play forward. What you're hearing right now is only this thing, the action of this thing. The tweeter is clearly removed. There's no other speakers in there. So I'm not bullshit. I'm not BSing you. There's really nothing in there. But it's managing to play pretty much full range. And the way it's doing that is pretty much through the Bernoulli effect. It's the way that these have the risen fins in the center, and they're shorter on the outside. So actually kind of, every time this thing pistons, it actually forces the air on the inside to basically strum the fins. And the fins themselves are what's actually causing the high frequency sounds. And you're hearing it coming out of the holes. So it has like a really cool, like, I guess kind of like a seashell effect. So even with my butchered job of like, reinstalling the surround, I couldn't get it fit properly on. I ordered the wrong size surround. It was a bit too big, so I had to trim it. And so I went in and just installed it inverted. So I did get it centered, so it's not grinding or anything. So it's playing well enough, and apparently also enough to be a tweeter. And I actually have it right now on bass all the way up, high all the way down. So let's set it to normal. So now it's normal. There it is. So all those highs are actually coming from inside the chamber, from those little fins, without the tweeter even being in there. All the tweeter does do is, it, because of those holes right there, as it side vents, the rear of the tweeter works like the modern Meta matte disc. Because as you see how the holes are aligned, they're actually aligned to feed the horns, along with the rear of the woofer just pistoning against the air. So that's how these manage to sound so 3D compared to the LS50s. Is that they have those distinctive ribs, and it's the side venting all around here. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 holes. And the tweeter is typically, it's actually a 3/4 inch tweeter. So there's a lot of space for it. You kind of see the gap for where the tweeter sits. It's like right in there. And so the space around the tweeter is actually massive. And that's why they needed that gasket right here. Because that's the space the tweeter will occupy here. That's how much space it has. So it would side vent through these holes right here, which would then transfer through these horns and basically further agitate the Bernoulli effect, causing the fins to resonate, and in turn, as the fins resonate, they actually stiffen the tweeter, or stiffen the woofer. So it does basically everything at once. As the fins resonate, they would stiffen the woofer, make sure the woofer is always clear. So whatever the woofer last played gets absorbed like a heat sink back into the fins. Because the fins are always more active, being as there's more space, more surface area in the back than there is in front, just like with thermal dynamics and a heat sink. So it's like acoustic thermodynamics. And the tweeter, as it's playing, the back wave would be jetting out through the large walled side of the channels. But even without the tweeter, it still manages to perform this ghost tweeter action because it's tuned to play as if the tweeter was there. So the tweeter would just add to that. But even without it, it's so convincing. It actually sounds so much like there's already a tweeter in there. It's like bizarre. So if they really wanted to, they could have actually made the S series. Maybe, yeah, I mean, I kind of feel like playing with this myself, like making a really thin speaker and having it so that just the back of the tweeter is the source of the highs. The issue is that it's not truly single point. Right now, it's pretty much like a weird, like an inverted Diapolito, in the sense where the highs are only emanating from the holes, and the woofer, the lows, are coming from here. And if I were to cover these, and let me kind of just put this down for a second, and I'll go and cover the holes with my hands. I'll do my best to cover them. That must be in the song, of course. Right. Alright, I'm gonna remove my hands right now. I'm putting my hands back over it. So I'm covering the holes. And removing my hands again. Let me change to another song. It sounds like just ambience from Zelda. Let's play someone with voice. This is NCS. What's like a NCS song that everyone knows? I think, yeah, everyone knows the song, right? So the song's played in every single, by every DJ that you hire for, like, whatever the night. Isn't that weird? So basically this thing sounds like it plays like pretty much just the out of phase channel. Just by itself is like an out of phase box. uncover the holes again. Alright, I'm gonna uncover the holes. Yep. And yeah, that's the role of these striations and the fins in the back. I could just take this thing out and show the fins. I have other videos that show them. If you check out the channel and just look back on the log. I know this channel is like a whole bunch of random uploads by a whole bunch of random people, but you see the ones that are about speakers. I probably have to cover these holes right here too, because a lot of the holes are actually, a lot of the sound from the horns are actually coming out of these holes right here. So it ends up sounding like there is actually a phantom tweeter coming from in there, just because air is jet streaming from the horns and being forced through. At least the highest frequencies are. So yeah, it's just like a very strange effect, and I wanted to use it as like a kind of like a ambience augmentation box. Initially, but I didn't think that it would actually be able to play this high, because this thing's supposed to cross over at 2.2 kilohertz. It's not supposed to play anything above 2.2 kilohertz. And it's managing to play way up into the tweeter territory, which is not something I expected. But it could still work as an ambient tweeter. That's basically what it's doing, right? It's like it's pretty much playing as if it's a speaker with a woofer with an ambient tweeter kind of ghosted on the inside. This is probably the best form factor for a center they ever made. It's normally actually fully sealed with 2 low frequency woofers here, and obviously the same Uniq driver. It's not the same actually. This is, interestingly enough, they actually designed a specific Uniq driver only for the center that's different than for the mains. The response for the center was actually designed to be flat, because it was designed to be, clear of side walls and listened to from the front, directly on axis. Whereas the response for the mains, or the model for the sound signature, that would be a replica and further advancing the technology of the LS35As. So it sounds like the LS35As, but a modernized version. So they started with these to get the sound down perfectly, so that these two with some to sound exactly like this when they're actually like a phantom image of the mains summed would sound exactly like this if this thing wasn't like completely torn apart to shreds. Now that it's torn apart to shreds, it's only playing pretty much like out of phase sounds. That's what it sounds like to me. It sounds like it's pretty much only playing the rear sounds, as if it's only playing sounds from the port. But this box wasn't actually meant to have a port, interesting enough. So I'm wondering if they actually experimented with this, because these all seem to be modular, the way they designed it. So I wouldn't be surprised if like they actually did make them with like specific baffles that they could test different port lengths and stuff with. Yeah, but when I heard about like the mate attack, that was funny because like it was something that I remember talking about like years and years ago. Because it was based off of the way like the human lungs work and how like your lungs obviously work way better with like multiple bronchi than if it were just like a big balloon, two balloons, and you just like inhale air into two balloons. It would not be nearly as efficient. But since your lungs are comprised of a whole bunch of streams of air always enters with the lowest resistance. It's redundancy, right? But then also like the fact that it has the whole bunch of separate chambers. When you sing, what resonates? You have your vocal cords and your diaphragm holding a note while you're squeezing air out and it's resonating between all the channels, all the bronchi inside your lungs, being supported by your diaphragm out through these little flaps that are meant to direct food either into your esophagus or direct air into your lungs, or a voice of gold outside by resonating the two folds. So those folds would be very similar to the diaphragm that would be right here, and these would be similar to having lungs, where each of the channels allow for air to travel with a lot less resistance than if it was just to travel along like the surface area. It was just smooth. So it makes everything sound really interesting. It sounds almost like you're doing that one, the trick where you stick the headphone jack halfway in, but it's doing it with a monophonic speaker. But yeah, the last little secret trick, waste want, and waste not, want not, right? So when they were AutoCADing this thing, since this thing was a voice model for the LS50's entire the LS series, as were these things, look at the shape and the dimension of this thing. Does it look familiar to you? Because it's actually the same exact thing that was used here. They ended up taking this exact angle and model and converting it into this thing. See? It's the same exact thing. The angle is the same exact angle. See it? So this little tweeter island here was made out of this thing right here. They just turned it into this thing and made it into metal. I'm pretty sure it's a type of metal. I'm not sure what material exactly this is made out of. I'm sure it's something that's acoustically active as well. They typically don't just use aluminum magnesium. They typically use some kind of like a mixture. So it's probably like poly with aluminum magnesium. But yeah, this horn right here extends out to this thing. So these are this right here and that horn are supposed to be a continuum all the way down. So the tweeter is able to ride all the way down, pass, and then hit this rim right here. And then there's a crescent shape, which allows for wider dispersion, and it continues by attenuating ceiling and floor reflections, essentially, by having a steeper drop off vertically. This thing, on the other hand, while using the same exact thing, doesn't have the, and maybe because they actually just based off of the same tooling, they didn't have the chance to make a second thing that would actually be able to seal it. But it doesn't actually have a seal between the woofer and the tweeter, which is this Achilles heel. After you play past a certain volume, after its volume sweet spot, it starts sounding shouty and raspy because air begins to cause turbulence as it kind of comes in and out of this hole, and then the timing starts getting disrupted. And these right here, these little ridges, those are just indentations. This woofer doesn't have any fins behind it or anything that would actually stiffen it. It's just the parabola, and those right there, those tiny little ridges, would be what would be holding it as solid as possible as it's pistoning. But it still uses the continuum, where the surround is part of the woofer itself, and it's acoustically active. See these fins right here? These fins right here, these little ridges, are basically the same thing as what's on the backside of the tweeter, or sorry, the backside of the woofer in here. So I have a video that I'll probably link to this, where I cover the tweeter, and you'll still hear the tweeter like right from the front. It doesn't even make any difference, because the sound that's actually coming from the front doesn't actually come from the front. It actually radiates from here, or at last resort, it radiates from the ridges as kind of like a passive tweeter. So the sum of all these little ridges, with the tweeter being able to sound itself or disperse itself evenly because of this phase plug, is able to make it, like, regardless of the state of the tweeter, out toward you evenly, because the outer end of the surround is bounded, so it's always going to be reliable. And so these little ridges are always going to be there, and these little ridges are very acoustically active. You can try yourself. Just get like any kind of cap that's about the same size as this, and or ping pong ball, cut it in half, and just cover it. And you'll notice that you won't actually block the sound of the tweeter. You'll be able to block the tweeter itself, and you'll still hear the tweeter just fine. Because the tweeter actually emanates from everywhere else but the center. Because the whole goal is to get it so that sound always converges as a whole. So either the sound converges from here as a reflection, if you're at this side, or if you're from the front, then it converges from any kind of a circumference towards you, anywhere but from the middle. Because the biggest issue with UQ, or basically any coincident or coaxial, is the shotgun effect. And that's how they got rid of the shotgun effect, was by basically making it so that when you're sitting in the front, you don't actually hear the tweeter itself. You hear the tweeter only converged with the woofer. And these little ridges right here augment that, the same way that the little ridges behind this thing augment the tweeter. They use the same form factor and the same woofer, but this, yeah, like I was saying, this is a different different. I believe it's 8 ohms versus 4 ohms, and it's a different driver than this thing has. You couldn't even get it to fit. It's actually designed to not fit, so people, I think, really confuse them and install them incorrectly. The wiring color is really different. But this thing wouldn't actually use the tweeter as much as they would use it to basically just have it so that the tweeter itself has room to breathe. Has like plenty of air to breathe, basically. And that's why these things actually manage to sound bigger and more holographic than these things. They actually have more technology. Like, so for basically, if we were to do like a 1-to-1 comparison, you have the constrained layer dampening, which is the rods and the gasket that are holding these two together. There's actually rods and gaskets that are bolted, but it's bolted and so airtight that when this thing is blasting, you can actually feel the little, like the seam pinch your finger, like or if you're holding like this, it kind of beats like a heart, because it's the pressure actually becomes so high that it actually manages to almost leak air. It doesn't leak air. It just kind of like depressurizes a little bit. It like bends, and I think they were actually trying to replicate the birch of the LS50. Oh, sorry, the LS35As, which had flexible wood. They used thin wood birch in the original ones, and that made the bass and just the general sound bigger, and it allowed it to be corner loaded, and it was sealed. But this thing right here has a port, and the port only releases sound from the tip top corner. So sound that's inside of this thing, no matter what, no matter how loud, will just continue pressurizing itself until it reaches this top, and then it goes diametrically all the way down. It does like a little twist, and then it goes out the back diagonally downward. So it's always off angle with the directivity of the driver from the front, so that way there's never any sort of phase interruptions or incoherence. Even if you put it back against a wall, since the port shoots diagonally downward, it would never shoot. You know, like the port whatever is coming out of the port would never be perpendicular with what's coming out from the front. And the port does the same thing, where it's playing not just a boost in bass, but a boost in pretty much it's not even a boost, it's more of like what the VoIP pipe does, where it plays as if it's a miniature room, like with perfect acoustics. So that way it's able to take the sound of the out of phase like harmonics, process them through phi, which automatically creates a 1/5 tonic relationship, kind of like, you know, like a power chord, and they even do that. They even apply that here too. The 1/5 tonic relationship. They apply that here too, of course. But yeah, it's so that no matter what, the sound that comes out of the port ends up being actually more musical than it would have been. It kind of like filters out the sounds that you wouldn't want to hear, and it kind of stabilizes the sounds that you would want to hear. So the sounds that would naturally resonate in a perfect acoustically treated room, it's simulating inside the speaker by being the shape of phi. and having it so it's the longest path to travel as the sound is pressurizing on the inside. It eventually does travel out to through the port, and it takes a bit of time for it to do that. And that time, that little delay that takes, between the sound from the front arriving to you, and the sound from the rear exiting, once this thing's fully mass loaded and pressurized, and then bouncing off the walls everywhere, and then hitting your ears, is what causes the spaciousness, the same type of spaciousness you hear when a guy is singing in a tunnel or something like that, where you hear him from all around you and you hear him from in front of you. So directivity, you hear him from in front of you first, but then you hear the spaciousness also reaffirmed with the sound of the out of phase sound of basically the entire space resonating all around you in such a way that if you play this loud enough, they actually sound fully 3D, because it actually manages to shoot enough sound with enough bandwidth out of the back, and you can hear it coming in here. So imagine this sound right here coming out of the port here and blasting and filling the room, and that's always trailing what's coming out of the front. And that's actually the secret to how this thing sounds more 3D and sounds fuller than this thing does. This thing isn't able to, this thing tries to do what everything this thing does, but can't accomplish it because it's actually too expensive to do what everything, like all the parts that this thing actually has are just way more expensive than what this thing costs to make. And they couldn't actually get a pressure vessel effect on this thing. So they did create the flexible elliptical V-shaped port, which is more, it's supposed to reinforce the sound of the broadband port. So as the sound is exiting, the out of phase sound does get sharpened and it gets basically treated. It has pixie dust sprinkled on it, so it sounds better and sounds more spacious, but it still doesn't reach the same quality. It doesn't reach the same intensity as these guys do. So a speaker about 1/4 the size manages to sound bigger, and that all has to do with playing with space. And that's what you're hearing through this guy right here, is the playing of space. So they just recently used these woofers again to make the T1 series. And the T1 series are actually pretty interesting speakers too. I'm going to do a little review on those guys, because those speakers are very unique and they're doing something that is heading in a different direction that's very interesting, because they're doing almost like a reboot of the Coda series, because those are not Unicue speakers, but they do use the XQ style baffle, where it has, well actually they use the XQ style baffle is pretty much also used here, and also used here to pretty much, if I don't have it with me right now, but it has the same kind of ridges, which from every single angle it causes it so that the sound bounces toward you the same way that this thing is used as a wave guide, so that no matter which, wherever position you are, there's gonna be an angle that's facing you. And the same thing applies to the little shadow room on the outside. There's 3 shadow rooms around these, and so no matter which angle you're facing, you're gonna be hit by the acoustic facade, the baffle on this thing. Yeah, but that's my current research on this thing. I just had to get the woofer taken apart and then put back together so that I could get it to really show what the fins do, because I was really trying to demonstrate what the fins do in isolation. The only way I could do that is by removing the tweeter, removing everything else, and showing it, because I didn't think that people would actually just believe me. But yeah, that's how impactful the design is. So there's a lot of like I was saying like before, there's a lot of technology that this thing has that as to yet hasn't actually made it into the higher end KEF. So if you want the metas, you could have them. These basically are the metas. They do what the metas do. So the current generation has the sealed gasket. It has that matte disc behind it, which is the same thing as what this woofer already does. And it tries to be better by having a flat response curve, but KEF kind of play the game when it comes to that, because KEF know that they're not really meant to make mono speakers. They're even when they made a center speaker in this thing, they made it like different. They didn't just take one of these guys and put it sideways. They know that making a very good speaker and then making another one that's exactly the same doesn't mean you're gonna end up with a perfectly good stereo set of speakers. It takes a lot more than that. So yeah, they're gonna go and pass the test. They're gonna do the thing to make it so that the sweep will look however it looks. These were originally supposed to look like the sweep actually looks pretty much like the LS35As, and it sounds like the LS35As, and that was the whole point. Same goes for these. The metas, however, it's almost like they're erasing history and pretending as if the LS50s were never supposed to have the LS part, and are just going for the R series part, and they're just called the metas. And they're recycling the box because the box is the most like popular, like high-end box they have. So why wouldn't they, right? And by having a flat frequency response, everyone is more impressed by it. But what's funny is that KEF can make a flat frequency response like by literally just like auto-correcting it. They use computers they use finite element analysis, and I mean making speakers, and they were basically the pioneers of, they're like the Pixar of using computers and finite element analysis to do speaker design. So if they wanted to make a flat speaker test, a speaker that would test flat, they could do that. But the purpose of the metas is to basically just be a way of not having to make this driver continuously forever, and to have something that people might want to buy as a quote upgrade, even though you may hear that it sounds like better because of the matte tech. It's really not the matte tech. It's really just the fact that it doesn't have the gasket issue. It doesn't have the turbulence issue. And the rest is just subjective. Do you like the sound of something that was voiced to sound like so that voices would sound like voices, so that you can tell the difference between like a bass and an organ? Or do you want a guitar do you want a speaker that's able to play one note at a time evenly? I don't really care about that.